Welcome to the Jazz Roundtable, brought to you by Live at Zero BPM, with your host, Grammy Award-winning percussionist and mallet player, Billy Hulting. Tonight's guests, Brad Rebuchin, Jeff Miley, and Mitch Holder. If you care to donate, click on the donate/tip jar link in the description or on our website at liveatzerobpm.com/tipjar. You can also tip on Venmo at ZEROBPM. And now, let's get to the music with your host, Billy Hulting.
Hey, everybody in Internet land. We are back with another Jazz Roundtable. This is number 10, and we decided to do something fun tonight. We're going to do the history of jazz guitar. Now, we're not going to get to everybody, I promise, but we have a killer list. I've already done the show notes, and they're up online. I will put the links are in the descriptions on both YouTube and Facebook, but I'll put it in the chat rooms also. Save that for later because we have links where you can listen to like 40 or 50 different guitar players throughout the history of jazz if you want to learn more. But tonight, I just want to say, if you're out there, click like and share the video and send it out to people. We're total grassroots. We love to have any help we can get getting the promotion out there. And if you do care to tip, it's I'll put it up on the screen. I'll also put it in the chat rooms, but it's live@zerobpm.com/tipjar or on Venmo at ZEROBPM. So, and we are completely 100% tip based. That's a commercial. I'll only say that 20 more times before this is over. But I'll tell you what, let's bring the guys in here. We got, hey, it's Brad Rebuchin, Jeff Miley, and Mitch Holder, just like the guy said. Okay, we get a big round of applause for that. So, guys, we came up with this topic. We know it's very broad, but we're going to kind of narrow it down and talk about eras and styles and that sort of thing. But just so you guys know, they're going to do some playing in the styles of these guitar players. I don't like to play copyrighted music on the show out of respect for the artist, but we have plenty of links that you can check that out. But these guys are such amazing guitar players, we'll be able to cover a lot of ground. So why don't we just get right to it? Sound good?
Sounds sure.
Good? Okay. You know, so we're going to talk about like 6 essential guitar players. This is a list that Brad came up with, but was ratified by the other guys. And you know, the first one on the list, which comes from the 3 early groundbreaking guitarists that we have listed, is Charlie Christian. And Mitch, you've got a Charlie Christian-like guitar with you right now. Do you want to talk about that?
Okay. Yeah, I wound up bringing 2 rigs tonight. So
nice.
Oh my gosh.
So this guitar, this is not from the Charlie Christian era. This is this guitar was made in the year 2000, but it was a custom order, and Gibson had some bar pickups that they hadn't used, and they were making guitars, and this became one of them. So this is a ES 350 thin body, but it's got this Charlie Christian bar pickup. Okay, now the thing is, if I plug this guitar into, say, a Fender Deluxe or the equivalent to that, it's going to sound pretty much like a hollow body with a P90 single coil pickup. Okay, the key to Charlie's sound was the fact that the amps at the time, which first was called an EH 150, that was a Gibson. And then later a bigger one with more power came out, an EH185. And the key of the circuit was that they were a single circuit amplifiers. Okay, so all I wanted to bring out was, in combination with this pickup, you need the single circuit amplifier to complete that sonic environment. Okay. So what I did was, because, you know, these EH150s and EH185s, you spend most of your time trying to keep them maintained. They're so old, they're falling apart. I got a Les Paul Junior reissue single-ended amplifier that Gibson made in 2005, and I bought it because it was similar to a Fender Champ, which is what Keith Richards, Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, for rock and roll, you know, they didn't use big amps. They had these Champs, had single volume control cranked it to 11, and they played their solos, and it sounded great. Okay, so I primarily got it for that because I didn't have a single-ended amp. Anyway, I turned the volume down and turned the tone way up, and here's the sound. So I don't know how it translates through the computer, but without that single-ended amp, and I can't hold it. It's a real small. It's a Tweed small amp. It's got an 8-inch speaker, one tube. That's the key to single-ended. One power tube.
Okay, and
So
now,
it's not. Yeah.
when you say bar pickup, can you hold that up again? Now, as opposed to like most guitars where each string has its own pickup, correct?
Correct. So
Okay.
the bar in the middle of this pickup is the pole piece. It's not 6 individual pole pieces. It's one pole piece. And, I don't know if you can see it. The first 2 years they made it, the bar was straight across, and the B string pops out. All guitar players know when you have an electric guitar, the B string always pops out. So on the later versions of this, I don't know if you can see this.
Let me get a better shot
It's
here.
notched. It's notched under the B string. There you go. You see that notch?
Uh-huh.
So it balances. It balances out. So they only made this pickup for just a few years, and then it became an option.
Okay, well, let's
So
talk
they're very, very rare.
let's talk about Charlie Christian. And now he was one of the first cats on the scene playing jazz guitar. What was his main contribution to the
Well, I mean,
Well, one thing I just want to add is
go ahead.
that's
Yeah.
they actually call that pickup a Charlie Christian pickup.
They do,
That it's actually named after him. Because he sort of put it on the map until now. I'm sorry, go ahead,
Yeah.
Jeff.
The players do. Gibson never did
Yeah.
because he was never
Right,
an endorser. And just
right,
as an addendum, because it took me a long time to figure this out. In the 50s and 60s, they had an aftermarket pickup, and it was called the Oscar Moore pickup.
Oh, nice.
And I'd see it, and I'd say, well, God, it looks like a Charlie Christian. So you know what it was? It was the fact that in the 50s, Oscar Moore was real popular because he was with Nat King Cole,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So by that point, Charlie had died. He died of tuberculosis, and Gibson had never signed him on. So they said, well, let's offer it, but we'll call it the Oscar Moore because Oscar's so well known.
That's so
And
cool.
but Gibson never ever called it the Charlie Christian. The pickup, the players did.
everyone
Players
else does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Cool.
cool.
Well, let's talk about Charlie Christian's contributions.
Well, the thing with the pickup is on the amp is all of a sudden the guitar has some sustain and some volume, so he can play single notes with the horns. He can solo. Before then, there's guys playing banjos or acoustic instruments and just chunking away back there. So it kind of brought the guitar out front, and he was like one of the first guys kind of doing that thing.
Cool. Now, when you mentioned the banjo, Mitch mentioned John St. Cyr, who started out with banjo with Louis Armstrong,
Yeah.
and then he had later switched to acoustic guitar. He didn't go make the move to electric. But Charlie Christian come after St. Cyr?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
Let me just
definitely.
give you a lineage.
Cool.
John St. Cyr was a
Cyr.
banjo player in the 1920s. Which think about it, it's 100 years ago now,
Yeah,
right?
it's
Dixieland jazz. That's where we first heard the word jazz. Was Dixieland jazz, right? So all through the 20s, there were no guitar players. They're all playing banjo. John St. Cyr being one of them. He was playing with Louis Armstrong. Got into the 30s, and then swing was slowly starting to develop, and the banjo players were switching off to the guitar. But you know, a lot like George Van Epps. I don't know if your audience, probably a lot of them know it. He started out as a banjo player, and you as a banjo player, and we're talking 4-string, not 5-string. Bluegrass hadn't been invented, but if you got a 4-string banjo and it's kind of sounds like that kind of thing, you know.
Yeah.
And so initially when the banjo players went over to guitar, that's how they were playing.
Okay, so
And
back in the days at Charlie Christian, we also have Django Reinhardt and Freddie Green listed from our early guitar players. But Django and Freddie Green were very different players, right?
Very, very different. Yes.
Do one of you guys want to talk about either one of them?
Well,
first?
let me say something about Charlie Christian before
Okay.
we move on, because I think that a big point for me is just how important he was for the history of jazz guitar and really all guitar, electric guitar, because really you could hear like some of the things Mitch was playing. It almost also sounds reminiscent of like, you know, early rock players, you know, B.B. King, you know, Chuck Berry, rockabilly, you know all these, you know, and then going on into whatever, you know, Jimi Hendrix or whatever, you know sort of he sort of was foundational in that whole language of sort of combining this sort of blues elements, but also adding a more sophisticated thing that sort of was, he was also one of the forefathers of bebop. And some people, you know, some people consider him just as important as, and I kind of agreed, as Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, and I found even that some people believe that a couple of Monk's tunes, Epistrophe and Rhythm and Thing, were actually Charlie Christian tunes.
Really?
You know that because what happened is he was jamming with those guys in the, you know, in like 39, 40, 41, you know, until he died. I believe he died in 42. And by the way, he died when he was 25. But at that point, there was a recording ban because of World War II. So no records were made, but these guys were jamming, sort of making this new music that would go on to become bebop. And so you can really hear, you know, but even in his recordings with, you know that sort of, he's playing some of the vocabulary that would later appear in, you know, bebop and going forward. You know, playing more off the chords, using more arpeggio type stuff. So I think like when I say like one of the 6 essential guitar players, he's just so fundamental to, you know, and like for instance, Wes Montgomery famously could play all of his tunes and solos by heart, you know before he was, you know, and many other players too, you know, and the other thing I want to say is really he when he only had like about a 3-year run where he made all this impact, you know from when Benny Goodman discovered him until he died of tuberculosis, and he was actually already sick for a good portion of that time. And the last thing I'll say is and he's actually was buried in an unmarked grave back in Oklahoma, so we're not even really sure where he's buried, you know, some of the significance. And it kind of goes back to, not to go off the road too much, but back to sort of the way black musicians in particular were treated, because he was also a groundbreaker. He's one of the first black musicians to play with you know, profession, you know, with major white artists, you know, in this case, Benny Goodman, who was sort of opened the door for. Anyway, there's a mouthful.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting stuff.
Charlie.
Can I just add one more thing to what Brad, a reference to what Brad said? It's kind of an interesting thing, and I think a lot of players don't know this. T-Bone Walker, the blues guitar player, and Charlie were friends when they were kids, and they both started. They lived in Oklahoma City, and they started playing guitar with the same teacher. Okay. So if you listen to T-Bone and you listen to Charlie, you'll hear a lot of the same ideas in their respective styles. T-Bone is in a blues style and Charlie's in a jazz style.
Interesting.
But you can definitely hear the connection. It's real interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That's
didn't know
cool.
that.
We'll have to have a Charlie Christian day here on the Jazz Roundtable.
Charlie Christian
we
week.
we could totally do it.
Yeah,
Charlie
yeah.
Christian week.
You know, we got 40 guitar players, and we have 52 weeks in the year. So,
There you go.
now I just want to take a quick shout out. With Toby is here, and Toby is one of our biggest fans, and she helps promote the show. And I have
Hey,
some
Toby.
people watching on YouTube and a handful on Facebook, and I want you guys to write in and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from the people out there, and if you want to say hi to anybody or if you have any questions, put them in the chat room, and we'll try to get to those if they bring up somebody. So, but well, before we leave the early guitar players, let's talk a little bit about Django Reinhardt and Freddie Green.
Yeah.
Who wants to take that one?
Well, I mean, Django, kind of, even today, you know, you'll hear people just say, it's like a style of guitar playing, gypsy jazz or Django or whatever. If somebody will tell you on a gig, oh, just play like Django on this, and everyone knows what it means. And he's French, and he played in a quartet with Stefan Grappelli on violin, and he just, well, if you just listen to him for when he was playing, for as long ago as he was playing, his just command of the guitar and his technique, and he overcame a handicap. He was in a fire as a child, and his hand got burned, and so he could only use 2 fingers in this hand.
Can any of you play something like in the style of?
I mean, well, I'll just play like, if he was gonna play like just a minor arpeggio, which, let's say G minor. Whoops, let me turn up a little here. Something like that. He would have to do it like this. Just these 2 fingers barely work. Like that. And he kind of developed like a whole repertoire of, like, there's ways that his fingering works really good for certain things. If you limit yourself to 2 fingers, it's kind of interesting.
And he was one of the first European cats, right? To come over and play guitar.
Yeah.
Well, kind of the first that anyone knows of.
That everyone knew, that became famous.
You know, there might have been others
Yeah.
before him, but he was sort of, he's the first really significant non-American jazz guitar player for, you know, until maybe the 50s or something, or later.
Yeah.
Right. And he's more like, I guess, I want to say late 30s, into the 40s, and I think he died in the 50s,
Yeah.
right?
Well, the link I have.
You know, one. Yeah.
Go ahead.
One thing I just want to say is he's really fun to check out because he's sort of like the first shredder.
Yeah.
You're right.
Because he plays a lot of flashy, dynamic, but melodic stuff. You know, and it's even more remarkable because he's with 2 fingers, but he's very driving, energetic, and just in your face. You know, kind of almost like with like a rock attitude. You know, before rock. You know.
Well, that
And he was, you know, one thing to mention, he's not only, he's a gypsy, so he's sort of coming from this sort of, you know, not accepted class of people, you know, sort of a, you
Right.
know, I know, gypsies were not considered cool. I don't really explaining it very well.
Yeah,
but in other words, he's sort of coming from an underclass of people that were an oppressed class. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm looking for. You know, and like was born like in a trailer and stuff. You know, like with horses and like he
Caravans.
wasn't living like
He
in
traveled.
a apartment building or something.
Well, the other
like a
thing about
caravan. That's the way to put it. Yeah.
that gypsy jazz sort of thing, like Vinny Raniola was on a couple of shows ago from New York, and he and Frank Vignola, they do a lot of that kind of jump swing gypsy jazz stuff. It's super energetic and super fun to listen to. And I guess one of his big famous songs is Minor Swing, and that's the link I have on the notes page.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So, okay, well, what about Freddie Green? So many people talk about him. Can you just tell us?
Can we just say one more thing
Yeah,
about
sure.
Django? I've always wondered, maybe Brad or Jeff, maybe you know this. When he was in the caravan, there was a fire. I guess a candle burned down and lit the trailer on fire,
trailer,
and it burned his fingers together. Was that when
Yeah.
he was very young? Was that what before he played, or was he playing?
I'm not.
Does
does he-
anybody
well,
know?
know if
I've
he
never
was-
found anyone that knows.
I think he was
I
very
get the.
pretty
I
young.
think I read somewhere that he was more like not a kid. Sort of maybe like a teenager or something.
Okay.
You know, but
So,
I'm this
yeah.
this is purely off by the seat of my pants. I'm answering that.
Yeah.
I just wonder how different his playing might have been if his fingers hadn't been,
yeah.
if his hand hadn't been burned. I've always wondered
Right.
about that because he
Yeah.
was able to adapt so well.
Yeah.
What if he had full
Right.
facility? What might he have done? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'd
Yeah.
really be in trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting. Okay. Are we done? Are we...
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's go. Let's talk a little bit about Freddie Green because I know he had something very stylistic.
Oh, he
that we
never
can talk
played a solo. Who cares about him?
No, I found a recording
I'm
of.
talking about Freddie King.
I
really found a solo.
I found a solo. This is one of his 2 solos that's recorded, and he plays kind of a chordal thing. So that's the link that I found for him. But what
Yeah.
he did with chords,
Yes.
come on.
Well, I mean, not just chords. I mean, again, this is another guy where he created a style that's to this day everyone knows, and you'll see it written on charts. Band leaders will tell you, this is Freddie Green style right here. They just write it in the chart.
Can you
And-
demonstrate?
Well, it's just like a quarter note way of like if you're playing a blues, like instead of 3, 4, instead of this, instead of that, he'd be like this. Really slow. Like that kind of thing, and he's almost like another drummer in the band, you know.
Well, you do hear it so often. People say, "Yeah, Freddie Green style," and
Yeah.
they just mean that kind of driving quarter note thing, right?
And I
Yeah.
one time I got to see Count Basie big band
Mm.
with him playing, and it's quite an experience. It's like when you listen to him and that drummer, I just never heard anything like that. It's so cool. It's just
Very
incredible.
cool. Okay, well,
Jeff,
go ahead.
Yeah.
I heard Basie's band too, and
Yeah.
thing I noticed was, and walking, they were already playing. This was in Vegas, and I was coming
Yeah.
in late, and I'm
Yeah.
walking in. You know how when you walk in, what do you hear? The bass, right? You usually hear the
Right.
bass first,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I'm walking in the hall, and I heard Freddie first. I'm going, Jesus,
Nice.
you know, no mic,
Yeah.
no mic, and he's
Right.
holding the guitar like this,
Yeah.
so he doesn't restrict the back, and
Yep.
the strings were at least a half an inch off the fingerboard, and he was
Yeah.
getting them down with no problem at all. It was
Yeah.
unbelievable,
Wow.
unbelievable. Yeah.
It's quite a sound. It's quite a sound. It's amazing. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
you know,
somebody.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just say a thing to add to that, just so everyone understands. They're talking about a big band, not a big band
Yeah.
with all the horns and everything. And
Right.
and what and for a long part of his career, he wasn't even using an amp, because this was sort of
Right.
I'm not sure when probably he was using an amp when you guys heard him, but so
No, he wasn't.
instruments
He
at
wasn't
that
when
point.
I heard him.
Oh, okay.
No,
Well,
when
so
I saw him.
going back to what Mitch was saying, really, his guitar was set up not for ease of playing, but for pain and suffering, but to be as loud as possible. So he had really heavy strings and really far off the neck, and plus he's not trying to dampen in any way, because he's making his own amplifier, and he's trying to cut through, like 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, 5 saxes, drums, full drums, bass, and piano, and what am I forgetting? I guess that's it, right?
Yeah.
I think he,
Anyway, a lot,
Yeah,
and sometimes
and
a
he
singer,
did cut
and
through.
sometimes and often in a big hall, and sometimes outside,
Right.
like you go see him at Disneyland, he's playing outside.
Yeah.
And the point is just, in spite of all the make it so hard to play, he contributed so much to the feel of the group, that when it was the way the group felt is a significant part of it, because he's not going to play a solo.
Right.
One thing you probably can't on a guitar like that.
Probably
you know, with the action like that, that could be why he never took a solo. But also, it's so in other words, so much of music we forget about is about making it feel right. And so he was the king of making music feel right. And sort of being under the radar, except for those of us that are paying attention, like other guitar players.
And for those 2 solos.
Yeah, and for those 2 solos. But those were kind of almost. I know at least one of them was kind of a joke that Basie would do sometimes. Okay, now we're going to feature Freddie Green, and everything. Oh wow, he's finally going to solo, and then the band just cuts out, and he's just doing his part, his normal rhythm part. Anyway.
Well, let's move on.
I'm sorry, Mitch. Well, Mitch, do you have something else to say? Because I kind of cut you off.
No, I just remember. And the other thing too, a lot of times you would only hear one note. So, for instance,
yes, that's correct.
If we're playing a shell voicing. That's what we call these voicings now. So I'm playing a G. I got 3 notes. Playing on and typically I'm on the 6th string, the 4th string, and the 3rd string. So when he played, you'd hear that kind of thing. But a lot of the time you'd hear. Real loud, really loud.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And it just cut right through, and it just sat in the overall sound, and it was perfectly placed and sounded perfect. Freddie Green.
I'm sorry. One last thing I want to say about that is it seems like it'd be easy. And we've all seen these charts, that say Freddie Green style, especially when I was first playing with big bands and stuff for the first time or whatever. It's really hard to make that, just to be consistent, because just consistent, make that feel right in driving.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of something, it seems like, it's very easy. Yeah, I just play quarter notes. But to really make it feel right with the right accents and stuff, it's one of the harder things. I still don't, I worked on it, and I still feel like I have it under my fingers the way I do some other things that seemingly should be harder. Anyway,
It's an art. It's an art. Yeah.
Let's say one more 30-second thing before we move on, but I would say he's the perfect example of, if you develop a good sound on your instrument and you have really good time and you know where to put yourself in the beat with the band, you're going to be heard no matter how loud the band is.
Yeah.
You're going to be heard.
It's true.
Well, and you're going to be. They're going to watch you in the band. They're not going to watch you. The band, even more important.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he played with Basie for what, like 40 years or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
It's a good gig.
Yeah, it's not bad.
You know what he always said? He said that somebody asked him. He said, "Freddie, what advice do you have for an aspiring musician?" And Freddie said, "Always put your uniform on top. Always pack your uniform on top." That's what he
So
told
it
me.
doesn't get wrinkled.
So when you get to the gig and you're late,
Yeah.
the uniform's on top. That's what he was referring to.
That's cool. Let's see.
Good advice.
Let's move on to section 2 of 4. I'm kidding. But now we have we section people on the mainstream guitars of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and yes, there are a million. But let me just grab a couple of names out of here. You have Wes Montgomery, Tal Farlow, Herb Ellis, Kenny Burrell, Jim Hall, Joe Pass, John Pisano, George Benson, George Van Epps, Jimmy. How do you say his name? Is it Weeble? Weeble?
Weibel.
Jimmy Weibel. Jimmy Ramey and Hank Garland. You guys want to just pick one of those guys and talk about him?
Well, we should start with
Any
Wes.
one of them.
Wes? Okay.
Just because he was so huge. I mean,
And what did he do that changed? What did he when he came on the scene? What was he doing that was different or changed things?
well, I mean, the cliche thing, which I shouldn't say that because it's amazing, is his octave thing. And he didn't play with a pick. He played with his thumb, like just the flesh on the strings, like that. So that was kind of that's a thing where people will say, if you do that for 2 seconds on any gig, people just think Wes Montgomery right away, you know. But yeah, there's a certain sound he got with his thumb. That was just, I don't know how he did it. And
You know, and that wasn't intentional on his part. The thumb.
right, that was an accident, or that was by necessity.
Well, no,
I guess, right?
it was on account of he didn't start playing guitar until he was 18. He was
Right.
married, and he wound up. He had 7 kids, but I don't know how many kids he had when he was 18. But he had more
Yeah.
than 2 or 3. So
Right.
he's married. They're in an apartment. He takes up the electric guitar. He always practiced with an amp, and his wife and the neighbors were complaining all the time. It's too loud. It's too loud. He had a pick, and he's
Yeah.
playing. Too loud, too loud,
Yeah,
too loud.
yeah.
All of a sudden, he said, "What if I don't use the pick anymore?"
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
Then there's where that came from. So it wasn't really intentional on his part.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it turned into
Yeah.
a whole thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, you know a crazy thing about him too is that you know there's always, you know, the thing, okay, when we're checking out guitar players, you like trying to figure out how they get their sound, and I think one thing he had a big thumb, he had big hands, but another thing that I saw later, because everyone does it where they're playing like down like this, like a conventional approach.
Yeah.
But I encourage everyone to look because when I finally saw a video of him, he's actually playing where he has his hand like this and he's playing this way, which is crazy.
Right.
You know, like if someone came to me for lessons and they're doing that, the first thing I would do I'd like slap their hand. You know, but anyways, so and plus he's getting down and up strokes with the thumb at that angle. You know, because he could go above it, you know, like do really fast, you know, and single note stuff as well, you know, with alternating
With
up,
the
you know,
thumb,
alternate down and up with his hand at this weird angle.
Yes.
You know, I mean, when I first saw a video of him playing, I'm like, what the hell is that? You know, because it just looked so different from what I imagined. You know, because what happened is, you know, we're old enough that we learned how to play guitar before there was all these YouTube things, you know,
Right.
and then you
so
go
we
back
didn't
and you
know.
check these guys out and you go, wow, that's
Oh,
like way weirder than I thought.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have more to say about him, but anyone else have something they want to?
Well, you know, as far that alternate thumbing, I guess it would be.
Thumbing.
John Pisano told me, because John hung out with him all the time.
Yeah.
He said he grew a callus on the side of his thumb.
Right.
There's one video I've seen. I think one of the ones from Europe. The cameraman is over his left shoulder, and you can see the callus, and you can see him going up and down using the callus. So I called John. You know, I had to call John. I say, "Hey, John, you know what? You told me about the callus on Wes's thumb. You were right." You know,
Oh,
it's
man.
like I saw it. I couldn't believe it.
That's cool.
That's
Yeah.
wild.
Wow.
But Brad, what else did you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
to say?
Well, what I'd say is just, you know, same way I was talking about Charlie Christian, about how significant he was to the future of guitar, because not only did he have this special technique, but really sort of before him, people weren't playing solos with octaves like that, at least not that I know of.
Yeah.
You know, and so he really sort of triggered, you know, for instance, George Benson is an example of someone who really took Wes's
Took that
style
idea and ran with it.
and you know,
Yeah.
and build on his own thing using octaves and stuff, but also the idea of combining, like his classic solo would be, he'd solo first with single lines, then he'd solo with octaves, and then he'd solo with chord
Chords.
shapes, you know, like inversions. And so he's kind of one of the first guys I've really heard do that too. And there's sort of a lot of his solos are like that, sort of built that way. We're sort of increasing the amount of stuff that's happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And he really and the other thing I've said about his feel is just remarkable, and his just, and to me, just the joy of it just really feels like when I listen to play, it always feels like he's smiling. You know, like there's just a real
Joy.
happiness and joy about how he's playing, and there's, you know, there's so, you know, and he's done, you know, some stuff that's sort of more sort of, I'd say, you know, traditional, and then other stuff that's a little more commercial, you know, sort of groovy type stuff. You know, like Road Song would be a good song for people to check out to introduce to him for his more groovy vibe. Where he did some Beatles things, but also just so many, like 4 on 6, or just so many great things, and and Pat Metheny is another person that got a ton of things
Yes.
from Wes Montgomery.
From Wes, for sure.
And we can go on and on. I mean, he's really sort of just
Yeah.
one of the people you almost can't ignore if you're trying to play jazz guitar, because he's just, so, significant, I guess is the word.
Yeah. Now, as a non-guitar player, I definitely have listened to him before, and Jim Hall's another name that I know really well. Why don't you talk about Jim Hall?
All right, who wants to jump
You
in
want
on
me to
this?
go first? There's
Go
one
ahead,
thing
Mitch.
about Jim Hall was first and foremost, he was just the epitome of a musician, and the fact that when he went to college, he studied arranging and orchestration and composition and so forth. He was thinking when he comped, for instance, with Sonny Rollins, and there was a trumpet player, Art Farmer, some of those groups, the trios he'd play with no piano. And when he's playing 2/5s, for instance, and pop guys picked up on this R&B guys,
Yeah.
that sound.
Hey, make your guitar neck a little bit higher.
Yeah. Can
Up-
you
up
lift
a
your
little
guitar
higher?
up a little? No,
Oh.
lift it up
Oh,
so we
yeah,
can see it.
There
There we
you
go.
go. Yeah.
Okay.
There we go.
So I'm playing thirds and sevenths,
Yeah.
which would be right. So he was out of the low end, he was out of the high end. So the soloist had all this clearance at the top, and the bass player was completely clear
Ah.
at the bottom.
That's cool.
And if he was playing, say, he'd play them, like that, and
Nice.
just clean. It just worked so well. He was the first guitarist I ever heard comp that way. Now it's, so many players play that way, and it's so nice and clean, just
It
very
works.
effective. And that's the way he heard as an arranger.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's cool.
Anybody else?
What I'd say about him too is interesting thing about him is I think people, when people really evolve as players or musicians, they sort of play their personality.
Mm-hmm.
And Wes Montgomery seemed to have this sort of, for instance, I mean, I never met him or anything, but just enjoying life, happy, sort of, maybe a little extroverted or whatever. And Jim Hall's kind of the opposite. He's kind of very, very thoughtful, very mellow, very, understated, and so that's reflected in his playing. He's sort of kind of like the Bill Evans of guitar to me. Sort of like.
Yeah.
In other words, he's someone that's not filling up the space just to fill up the space. He's just trying to create a vibe, and he's such a great listener as someone to collaborate with, and that's why people like Sonny Rollins and many other people sort of chose him as their accompanist, especially when they had smaller, more intimate groups, because he was so perfect for that, because he wouldn't overplay, but he'd just do what was necessary. And by the way, I wanted to mention, since I have my guitar here, this is a 175, since we were talking about guitars, which is sort of kind of the workhorse of so many jazz guitar players. And Jim Hall, the first part of his career, this was what he played, one of these, and Pat Metheny and so many other, I think Jimmy Rainey.
Almost
I think,
everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah, almost everyone.
Yeah.
Because, and the thing about this guitar is it's sort of like the next step after the Charlie Christian thing, because this is really actually like bottom of the line sort of jazz guitar, in the sense it's just has a laminated top, which means it's just like plywood, and it's and so it's not like the warmest guitar to play or fattest guitar to play acoustically. But the thing about it, sort of it sort of speaks and it cuts pretty well, and so it's a great guitar to sort of play with a group and sort of be a little bit more horn-like. Oh, Joe Pass was another one. Joe Pass is another one that that played a big part of his most important recordings were done on 175, a Gibson 175, That's what the headstock
Herb
looks
Ellis
like.
put the 175
And Herb-
on the map.
And
Oh,
Herb
Playing
Ellis,
with
yeah,
Oscar
no,
Peterson, playing with Oscar
yeah.
Peterson, put it on the map.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Particularly the era we're talking about. I would probably more than half of the jazz guitar players there were played one of these. We're talking about like the 50s and 60s. Well, 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that's what I
Well,
wanted to
that
say about
Joe Pass is another one of those names that everybody knows, even if they don't play guitar.
Yeah.
Who?
Joe Pass, Joe. I think is that how you pronounce the last name? But do you want to say a little bit about him?
Oh man.
Well, I can go, or does someone else want to have something to say?
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Well, I'll start. So Joe Pass. Oh, wait a minute, Jeff. You said you wanted to talk about Joe Pass.
Well, you start and then I'll chime in.
Oh, okay. Well, I would
Right.
say he's played one of these guitars, and
There you go.
initially, and he sort of. Well, one significant thing he did is he sort of really put solo guitar on the map.
Yes.
Because famously he cut this one album called Virtuoso, which was just sort of almost like on a whim, with Concord Records. I forget the guy in charge of it, but whatever. But he said, okay, Joe, I know you do solo guitar stuff. I want you to come in and record. And basically, I think he was just like calling out tunes to him, and he just, he was so comfortable with just playing tunes off the top,
Yes.
off the cuff without necessarily having a specific arrangement. And so apparently he did this whole record like in a day of just sort of like, oh yeah, why don't you play Green Dolphin Street, which is one of the tunes on there, and it's just remarkable because he had so much facility and so much control of combining chords and solo lines and kind of going back and forth and the melody and sort of integrating it in this sort of really sort of loose improvisational yet it doesn't yet it sounds. It's something you could learn and it would sound like a worked out piece, but at least my understanding is that he's really sort of just playing, off the top of his head, just whatever song it is, and I guess the way he came to that is one thing. Is growing up, the story is that his dad wasn't really a musician, but he challenged him. Every day they'd listen to the radio and he'd say, "Okay, play this song, play that song," and he'd make them
Wow.
play these songs by ear, and so it's just sort of ear training by
Fire.
by fire. Yeah, and I guess his
Fire,
dad wasn't
yeah.
really a musician, but for somehow he realized that, and so I think probably he just had an amazing ear as far as hearing what something was, because I think he's one of those guys could play a song if he'd heard it. You wouldn't have to, in other words, like work out
Yeah.
like, okay, where's the 2/5? Where's the modulation?
Right.
I'm sort of, kind of extrapolating, but maybe someone has more concrete things on that. But and when you saw him play, he's another person that he's just sort of playing, kind of like not. Like Jim Hall always felt more, beautiful, but very sort of, I don't know, introspective and conscious of everything. And Joe Pass is more, and like Wes Montgomery, they're more just kind of just playing, just kind of, I don't know if I'm really explaining it right, but maybe just,
I think
You
I
did
don't know.
I think
fine.
he's you're explaining it right. I would say he's just more because he knows so many tunes
yeah,
and he's got everything together. He can play bass lines,
Yeah.
chord melodies. He can play single note lines at any tempo. He can comp with
Right.
the piano, and he knows 100 million songs. So he's always relaxed and comfortable.
yeah,
just
exactly.
kinda
You're not
does-
going to
he just-
stump him.
Yeah.
He's
So he
he's
just
never,
kind of
yeah,
does what he
exactly.
wants.
He's,
Yeah.
whereas I think Jim Hall is always a little worried, even though he's just as amazing in his own way, but just a little more
Yeah.
conscious, like, oh, things could go wrong, and I think Joe Pass is just a little more relaxed about it, and Wes Montgomery too. They're just like playing, and there's no stress,
Yeah.
about, Anyway, I said
Like
enough.
you know how sometimes you're on a gig and like you'll call a tune and then somebody in the band will go, I'm not, can we do something else? Because it's like
Yeah.
maybe they don't know it that well or whatever.
Right.
Joe Pass would never say that. Like
Yeah.
he would just play whatever they called at any tempo and he wouldn't care.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah, because he wouldn't have to worry. He probably knew.
he wouldn't have to
Because
worry. Yeah.
he'd hear it right away. But yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
You know, too, Jim Hall, was very introspective. He's very within his head a lot of times. Joe is just out there, and the thing that cracks me up is back in the '60s, a lot of guitar players would go and take lessons with Joe, and most of the time I heard the same story. I played with Joe. I knew Joe. I never took a lesson with him, but I heard the same story. Everyone who took lessons. I'll give you two examples of two players that everybody knows. One was Lee Ritenour. One was Larry Carlton. And both of them, I don't know how many times they went to Joe. I think it was maybe once or twice. So here's a scenario. You go in, you sit down. Joe says, okay, let's play. And if you hear something you like, stop me. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So they sit down, they play for a while, and Lee or Larry's, wait, Joe, what was that? And Joe goes, what was what? And exactly what Brad is saying, it's a stream of consciousness, and for Joe to reiterate what just happened, that's not the way he was wired. That's not him. Yeah. I had the same thing with I worked with George Benson once I was doing an overdub on a Brazilian tune that they needed some Brazilian rhythm. So it was an overdub. Joe was there, and Wayne Henderson was the producer at that time from the Crusaders. And I mean, it took about 20 minutes to do this rhythm part, and we get done, and I'm sitting out there. I said, George, let's play. So we still had 2.5 hours, in the session. Yeah. So George gets his guitar. Oh my God! I mean, I was sitting there playing rhythm. I couldn't believe what was coming out of his guitar, and at one point I lost it, and I started laughing and almost fell off my chair. And George says, "Mitch, what?" And I said, "George, what you just played was ridiculous." And he says, "Oh, I wish I knew what it was." Same kind of wiring, similar, not the same. Cool. No one's the same as Joe. No one's the same as George. But same reaction. It was funny. That's cool. So, that was a fun one.
There's one other guy I want to mention before we leave and move on to the modern guitars. I know there's so much to talk about, but Tal Farlow's on our list also. And I was at the Hollywood Bowl, the Playboy Jazz Festival, 20, 30 years ago when I was in college, sitting next to one of our jazz instructors, Gary Pratt. And Tal was up there playing with a group, and I'm listening to this really cool solo. It wasn't like anything I'd heard before. And this professor, Gary Pratt, leans over and says, he's playing the entire solo with harmonics. And he was playing the bossa nova or something, but the melodies were all just harmonics. And I was like, that's kind of crazy. That is cool. But I do want to mention a couple people here that are in the booth. We have our other regulars. Toby's here. Tom is a guitar player buddy of mine from Albany. He's here, and he sent a tip in, so thank you, Tom. Janet is here from Gretna, Nebraska. So welcome, Nebraska. Greg is here from Anaheim. Hi, Greg. And Toby's in Encino. And our good buddy Andre is here. He is one of our regulars. He's a guitar player here in L.A., and he's loving the conversation. Tom had a couple of questions. He said Freddie and Wes were his first jazz idols, but he did ask if Charlie C. played with Benny Goodman, and he did. We mentioned that, right?
Yes.
Charlie Christian?
That was his what put him on the map.
I see.
He sort of came out of nowhere to play with Benny Goodman, and then 3 years later he was dead.
Well,
it wasn't Benny's fault.
Toby asked a couple of questions, and these are Toby's not a musician, but she is probably one of the biggest fans of live music I've ever met. But she asks about the national guitar and the ovation. Are those anything that have to do with the jazz world, or?
Not specifically, although these days anything goes.
Yeah.
But, the national guitar it's what's called a resonator guitar, which means it has a big metal cone inside the body, and which vibrates from the strings, and it has a more specific kind of real nasally mid-range kind of bluesy sound. And what was the other Ovation.
Well, you just the Ovation, which we think of as the acoustic guitar. You know.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
an acoustic guitar, basically.
Well,
yeah.
that's the guitar people have seen with the round plastic back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Right,
actually they're like, some people that are coming up, like John McLaughlin, cut
Yes.
is a famous album called My Goes Beyond on an acoustic Ovation.
Oh, really?
True.
And also and he was
Gabor
playing for a while. and
Szabo
also,
too.
Yeah, Gabor Szabo.
Yes,
So
Gabor,
because these guitars also were sort of early acoustic guitars that had a pickup that didn't feed back when you're louder than like whisper.
Yeah,
It was the
you could play
best
'em in a
pickup
concert.
at the time when the Ovation
Yeah, at the time,
came out.
exactly. Yeah, right.
Yeah, was the best pickup.
And
yeah.
yes, and Al Di Meola, who's not on the list, also played an Ovation for a long time.
Yeah, I guess
doing
that
acoustic
is
stuff.
that's a good point because
So it had a
you know,
moment.
before that, if you're playing acoustic guitar, you got to put a microphone. But then
Yeah.
if you're on a stage
Right.
with a drummer and a bunch of musicians, it's a nightmare. And then the Ovation comes along and you just plug it in with a cable. So it definitely
I should maybe add
it was
Al
grand,
to the
yeah.
list here. You know, in our
yeah, put-
modern guys.
let's put them
Well,
on.
well,
there.
there's,
Yeah.
there's so many guys we could add.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's always
There
yeah.
was one. There was one early electric player. He had an electric hollow body that had a National neck and a body that had been made by Gibson. I think Gibson.
Oh, wow.
They sent National sent Gibson the neck and they put it on this body. I'm trying to think. It was really an early electric guy. It was even before Charlie. I can't think of his name right now. Eddie something, I think.
But we have
But
one
anyway.
other question from Tom. He says this is an easy question, but I got to ask: was there a guitarist with Glenn Miller? And if there was, who was he? I don't remember that. I used to listen to a lot of Glenn Miller when I was in high school. And I don't remember guitar.
Yeah.
Well, having a rhythm guitar player was pretty standard on most big swing era big bands.
Not
So
all,
I would
though.
guess.
Not all.
Well, yeah, okay, yeah, well, not all, but I mean,
Yeah.
it's fairly common. So, but I have no idea who that would have been.
Okay. Sorry, Tom.
We'll look that up.
But I'll be seeing Tom in a week at one of those music camps I direct. So, well, let's move on. I mean, we have
those guys knew nothing.
yeah. Like I said, I'll put the link up again. It's in the descriptions, but I'll put it up in the comment section, and then you can always go to the website. This will be under the podcast. Hopefully, I'll have the podcast done Friday, but the show notes are already up. And we've got a list of easily 40 different guys on here, and all of them have links to something you can check out. So, but now the next section we have is the modern guitarist, which is 1970 on. Which just let me go through a list here. Some names: Pat Martino, Larry Coryell, John Abercrombie, Pat Metheny, Ralph Towner, Alan Holdsworth, Mike Stern, Bill Frisell, John Schofield, Frank Gambale, Russell Malone, Lenny Breu, Ted Green, John McLaughlin, Al Di Meola. Oh, he is on the list. And
There you
Emily
go.
Remler. So pick
a nice
three
list.
each, and let's
Yeah.
Like the
Talk for
lightning
10
round.
more hours.
the lightning round. But I guess one of if there's somebody that, well, anybody specific you want to talk about?
Well, we should, in case we run out of time, we should talk about Pat Metheny for
Mhm.
modern era, just
Yeah,
because
yeah.
he's like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Icon.
he changed. You know, there's like certain guitar players that changed music. Like in the late '70s, Eddie Van Halen changed rock and roll guitar. In the '60s, Hendrix changed rock and roll guitar. In the late '70s into the '80s, Pat Metheny changed. He just changed everything.
And what was it about him that changed things?
His
Um,
hair.
part-
He had the best
Yeah,
hair
his hair.
of any famous jazz guitar player.
No, I think it was two main things would be his sound. He just had this. It was a different sound. Instead of the more Wes Montgomery, Jim Hall, Joe Pass sound, it was a little
Right size
brighter.
life.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
it's a little
Right
brighter.
size
A
life.
little,
That was
yeah, a little more
boom.
sustained. Like kind of like a bridge between a clean rock guitar and a jazz guitar. And he had this. And then his style was kind of. He definitely could play jazz. I mean, he grew up playing jazz, but he also had all this really cool, kind of folk and rock and pentatonic and like open like voicings. You know, like. not that voicing. What am I thinking of? Like stacked fist, that kind of stuff. That kind of sound. And I just for myself, he's like the first guy I heard like play a solo with a just a really pretty clean sound that I felt was as driving and exciting as all like the rock guitar players I was listening to at the time. It's somehow he was able to like put those two together, but still have that really pretty clean sound. But it really cut through, and it was.
Yeah, and his older albums, the way they developed into one, when it got to Still Life Talking and As Falls Wichita, So Falls Wichita Falls, I saw the Letter from Home tour 3 times because they happened to be in the same cities I was on with days off. And,
Cool.
He did like a 3-hour show, and it just never stopped building. And even the encore was just, and the songs, and if you don't, they just lift you. It's like it's also the best music to drive through scenery with, I think. But one thing that was also really impressive about the show, and it's like his lighting guy was saving scenes for the encore, stuff that you hadn't seen yet that would just blow you away. It was just like past music, because you talk about his tone and his style, but his compositions, to me, were really what's said. Immediately you hear something, it's like, that's either Pat Metheny or somebody who wishes they were Pat Metheny.
There you go. Yeah.
And it was also a lot of it was his collaboration and inspiration from Lyle Mays.
I agree. Yes, it's really, you need the two of those guys to pull all that off.
Oh God, yeah.
But I have it when I first got into Gary Burton on Vibes. One of the first albums I had, it was both Pat Metheny and Mick Goodrick on guitars, and Steve Swallow on bass, and the guy that played drums on everything. I can't remember his name. He was great, but it was I got it because he's a Vibe player. But listening to these two guys play, and then from there, so I'm a huge fan of them. Then, well, let's talk about some of the other guys on this. Lenny Breu was somebody I wasn't aware of, but you guys made a comment.
Lenny Breau. But
Lenny Breau.
Yes.
Let me say one more quick thing about Pat Metheny, because I think, kind of what you're referencing almost is he's one of the guitar players that really people, you don't have to be a musician to really enjoy. Like when you go to see his concerts, there's a lot of just people that, because a lot of times, let's say you go to see Pat Martino or something, whatever, it's going to be mostly musicians, mostly guitar players or whatever. But a Pat Metheny audience is really a lot of people that are musicians, but also a lot of people that aren't, because he's found a way to sort of be melodic and connect with sort of a bigger audience, but at the same time not be mundane and not be pandering.
Right. His music is,
and it's such a hard balance to achieve, to be, to sort of be cool and be not cool at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's accessible stuff, but it's interesting to musicians. That's a very fine line.
It's hard to pull off.
And he's and also, there's some musicians who sort of stay in one place, but he keeps evolving. He's always kind of on to new things, because he's done like Bright Side's Life that Mitch mentioned, which is one of the most iconic jazz guitar records of all time, most influential. But then he's done like Straight Ahead albums, with like a classic trio, doing standards. He's done,
Jack,
things like Still Life
Jeanette,
Talking,
all those records with him.
Oh,
like 8081, where it's where it's really more open and crazy, or things that are more aggressive, things that are more like world music, things that are more experimental, things with orchestral triggers, just all kinds of stuff. Anyway. I guess that's it. I mean, I could play a little piece of him if you want. Because I sort of was thinking.
Do some Brad. Here, let's get some Brad in here.
Brad
because I haven't played yet. So anyway, let's see if I got sound here. Anyway, this is a little bit of Pat Metheny, Change of Heart, and what's cool about it is it's sort of, he's really into using open strings and a lot of things that sort of people then went on and used, including me, like the beginning of the song it's like he's using the high string each string as a pedal, but doing the melody, so it's.
Nice.
But anyway, but notice it's just a very open, and the harmony is, very open.
Yeah.
Very open chords.
Nice.
Well, anyway, I can keep going. Anyway.
Well, the other
Yeah,
thing
go
that
ahead.
we used to notice a long time ago with Pat's compositions is that they're sweeping. They really go and they build and build and build, and it isn't just like a 4-bar, 8-bar, 6-bar A section. They're these long things, and the way he comes out of these with just so much harmonic force that makes you want to go to the next section. It's just,
yeah.
it's just
A lot of
beautiful.
it's very optimistic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Music. You know what I mean? Kind of like uplifting in a weird sort of.
Yeah,
I
we
mean,
need
not
a
in a
lot
weird
of
way, in a
that.
good way.
Yeah. You wake up not feeling good. Put on Has Falls
Awesome.
Wichita. So Falls Wichita, you'll be happy in it.
We'll be
So,
fine, yeah.
It's a
Um,
great album.
Before we get into some of these other guys, I know we're hitting the hour mark, but if you guys are cool, we can go a little bit longer. I think I hear that alarm.
Uh-oh.
Oh, there it is. Okay. And y'all know what that means out there. It's Conversations in Music. Sorry, I had to do it. So this is Conversations in Music, and you guys are going to do a little bit of trading, huh?
We're gonna-
Yeah,
yes,
we are. Well, it sounds like you could actually scat a 12-bar solo in between.
There took, I had to layer autotune 3 times on each of those tracks to get it in tune, and it still didn't do the job. So, and I can't beatbox, so we're out of luck there. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys, and Brad, why don't you take it away?
Okay. So I think we're just going to play a B flat blues, which is sort of
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I was gonna say it's
You
a
got it right.
12-bar. It's a 12-bar
Oh,
form.
12-bar form,
and-
more or less.
Yeah, and then in between each 12 bars, there's 1 1/3 bars before the next guy comes in.
Yeah. What happens is when we play, there's a little bit of latency, so we actually
Yeah.
can't play together, but we can play separately in
One
turn.
after another.
And so somehow we're going to reflect the entire history of jazz guitar within our 12-bar courses.
Let's see.
Anyway, here we go. 1,
We can try.
2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me turn on maybe my help. False start. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
right, guys. That was awesome. So while you guys were playing, I lined it up so the next Jazz Roundtable is going to be 3 other guitar players that are going to talk about your styles.
Oh,
So we're kind of running out of time. So we have a whole other section, the next generation, which was Wayne Krantz, Ben Monder, Kurt Rosenwinkel, Scott Henderson, Peter Russo. I don't know if we have time to get that, but I'd love to do this again down the road. But can we do like a lightning round? Can I just like say a name and you can 1 or 2 words that grab you about that player? Now, out there in internet land, I'm surprising them with this. They don't know this is going to happen. But I thought this might be an interesting thing. And you can all shout at once or you can take turns. And let me just pick a guy like John Pisano.
somebody jump on.
A true gentleman and a great listener.
Okay. Jimmy Weibel.
Harmony.
Harmony.
Harmony, counterpoint.
Hank Garland.
Melodic.
Diversity.
And, diverse.
Yeah. Country meets jazz in a very special and unique way.
Cool. Pat Martino.
Driving. I would
Force
say.
of energy.
Force of energy. Force of nature.
Force
Alan-
of nature. That's what I meant to say.
Alan Holdsworth.
What the hell's he doing?
I think of John Coltrane playing a guitar.
Okay. Bill Frisell.
The next Jim
interest-
Hall.
Yeah, the next Jim Hall. That's a
Exactly.
good way to put it.
Yeah. Master of space and tension.
John McLaughlin.
Everything.
Everything. I would say. I hate to use the word spiritual, but I would just say he's all about just positive energy and being good to your fellow humans.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it shows in
jazz
his
meets
music.
world meets world music.
Cool. Emily Remler.
Swinging, very swinging.
Brad Rabuchin.
Ooh.
Stretching.
Stretching, yes.
That's a good one.
Imaginative.
Unexplainable.
Speaking of which,
fearless.
I have a little graphic about upcoming shows, but there's not that much on it. But actually, this Thursday, Brad is coming in with a trio, and that's with Steve Billman and Sandro Feliciano, right?
Yeah.
And then the following Thursday, on the 29th, it's Miley Landers Taylor, which is Jeff Miley, Tim Landers, and Joel Taylor. So that'll be fun. And then on the 5th, which was to be determined, I think David Becker is coming in with a group, and I think Brad's going to play with him because it is Brad Rabuchin month here at Live at 0 BPM.
It is.
So we got some fun stuff coming out. Okay, well that's a pretty good show. I would love to get into more of these guys, and we'll talk about it a couple months down the road. Maybe we'll do a History of Jazz Guitar Part 2. I do want to shout out to Greg and Andre, who both tipped. Greg is new, so Greg, come back. Andre's one of our regulars. We'd love to see him. I'm trying to think if I missed anybody. I'm sorry. Not a lot of chatting. The shows people really like to listen to, but Greg wrote a nice thing in his tip jar. He said, I enjoyed learning about their historical artists and hearing the musical examples. So, Greg, we got more. And this is, it's going to be turned into a podcast, and this stays up forever. As you're watching an archive, you want to send something in, the money goes to the right place. I tell you, it goes to the guys. So if you want to help out. But thank you all for tuning in. I'm going to play my outro, and we'll hopefully, unless there's any parting final words, anybody?
Just,
Thank you
thanks,
very
thanks
much,
for
Billy.
watching. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks so much for doing this, and it was really fun
is
to
great.
sort of bounce guitar players back and forth with other guitar players
Yeah,
in a controlled environment, so there was no fist fights.
And it was fun for me. I actually learned a lot. But go to the show notes. I'm going to put them up in the chat rooms before I split, so it'll be up there. But check those out. We have tons of links to other guitar players. You can learn something new. And let me play our outro. Where is it? Here we go.
Thanks for joining us at Live at 0 BPM. These videos will be archived on YouTube and Facebook, so tell your friends. These Jazz Roundtable shows will also be released as a podcast, so please subscribe. Coming up on Thursday, July 22nd, it's the Brad Rabuchin Trio featuring Brad Rabuchin, Steve Billman, and Sandro Feliciano. Showtime, 7 to 8 p.m. Pacific. And as always, it's free, though donations are greatly appreciated. Go to live@0bpm.com for details and to sign up for our mailing list. Also, find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. See you soon!